There's increasing attention to the economic prospects of men in America, and whether their declining rates of college enrollment and completion signals something concerning about their opportunities. But what if a heavily underutilized tool that boosts earnings and skill building is the solution?
I think we need to move from this idea of like, I need a job to I need a career, and apprenticeships playing a big role in doing so.
On this episode, I sit down with a national expert on apprenticeships to explore why states and the federal government should invest more in this alternative as one of the most effective anti-poverty tools available to policymakers. This is Defending Ideas. Defending Ideas is a weekly podcast produced by Sutherland Institute. On this show, we are committed to renewing the principles of common sense conservatism, making you a better champion of sound ideas. This year, Sutherland Institute is celebrating its 30th anniversary, thanks to all those who support the work we do for Utah and our great nation. Welcome back to another episode of Defending Ideas. I'm your host, Nic Dunn. And this week, I want to talk about how to strengthen economic prospects for folks looking for work and opportunity. And specifically, there's some context to this conversation where we've had a lot of conversations recently about how to boost the vocational prospects for men in particular. We have our ongoing well-being initiative with respect to men and boys, and also how do we improve economic upward mobility for everyone at the same time. And we're going to talk about this through the lens of how we invest as a state and nation in post-high school pathways for things like education, training, and work. And to have this conversation, I'm very excited to welcome into our virtual studio. His name is Zach Boren, and he's the Senior Vice President for Apprenticeships for America. Zach, welcome to Defending Ideas.
Hey, Nick, it's great to see you, and thanks for having me on today.
We're really glad to have you, and it's a very timely conversation because not just here in Utah, but around the nation, there has been a lot of conversation, I would say broadly speaking, about how to improve upward mobility for everyone. How do we help young people as they're coming out of high school have access to learning and training opportunities that can get them into good careers where they can provide for families and provide a stable, healthy, happy life. And also in the context of, again, we've, especially on this show, we've had sort of an unofficial mini-series on the well-being of men and boys through a few different angles, and the vocational prospects, sort of the economic health of that demographic, is one of the issues that features prominently in those conversations in terms of how do we help more young men have really great economic opportunities, and can we do that in a way that has spillover effect where we're helping everyone? And so I want to kind of dive into this, and specifically, we want to talk about apprenticeships. We've talked about it a little bit on the show in the past in a couple different episodes, and really dive into the way we should be thinking about and talking about apprenticeships as a tool of this upward mobility idea we're going for. So maybe to start, Zach, could you tell us your story briefly? What brings you to this work? Kind of how did you end up being the guy at Apprenticeships for America that's helping folks like us here in Utah make sense of all this?
That's great. Yeah, if you're not familiar with Apprenticeships for America, we are a new organization that really intends to expand apprenticeships on a massive scale in the United States, bringing us from about 680,000 apprentices to 4 million in the next decade. And, the reason I do that is it's a family story. My dad was an apprentice before I was born. So he was in the Steelworkers Union. He worked for our local utility called NIPSCO, where he was a meter technician. And my dad was able to really gain the skills that he needed to succeed and bring us into the middle class. I would say the reason our family was middle class was because dad was in the union and someone trained him how to do this work very well. That opportunity lent itself to a 42-year career where he had a pension, good health care. We didn't have everything we needed, but we had enough. And, I had a chance to kind of travel around the country while I was in college. And one of the things that I did was I sold books door to door. And I did that in Appalachia. And I saw the poverty that happens when we don't invest in our people. And I thought to myself that, gosh, this is just so unlike how my family succeeded here in America, and frankly, more families should succeed. So, that work has driven a lot of the effort that I did I was the director of a registered apprenticeship and policy at the U.S. Department of Labor through the Obama years. I was not a political appointee; I was a civil servant, and then through Trump one. And during that time, we were able to expand apprenticeships, these earn and learn programs, uh, by about 160%. So I was really excited to work with some of the largest unions, the largest industry associations, the largest companies like Microsoft starting their very first apprenticeship program, and supporting them through that work. And that lent into the time I spent at Urban Institute as an intermediary, helping walk companies through the process, helping them get started with an apprenticeship program, offering them some initial funding to get started. It's a really important aspect of how we really grow apprenticeship in the United States is through this kind of sharing effort that we've started to invest in. And lastly, Nick, I'll just say, my work, and is really driven through anti-poverty effort. It's through my faith in Jesus Christ. I'm a big believer in the Gospel of Matthew 5. That blessed are the meek, and they will inherit the earth. And it is my goal, and it is my faith that we should be helping more young men and women get into really good work with dignity and purpose, and that Jesus calls us to do that. And at least he calls me to do it. And I would be remiss not to say happy International Men's Day to you, as we are today talking on Wednesday.
Well, thank you, Zach. The background is incredibly helpful, both kind of your family experience with you kind of seeing the benefit firsthand of apprenticeships through the work of your father and the what that provided for your family. And I personally I particularly like the faith component because I agree and I feel similarly that my own faith in Jesus Christ and that component as an anchoring part of my life is a huge motivator for what I also hope to do in alleviating poverty and strengthening upward mobility. And I love the dignity component too. And I think that ties in so well with what we're talking about because in my view, apprenticeships are one of those things that it is so focused on, if you will, building up the dignity of the human being who's in the apprenticeship program, because you're essentially saying, we will invest in you with a skill set. We will help you develop mastery over something where you can go out and obviously do it and earn money and provide for yourself, provide for a family. And it's very much an approach of you are needed in society. There's so much good work to be done, so many wonderful contributions to be made, and we need you, and apprenticeships are a way to help people kind of meet that need. And as you mentioned with International Men's Day, I think also so many of the stories we've heard about the numbers of young men, typically not only young men, but young men who do feel at times kind of disconnected from the economy, from society, from education, from civic institutions, and maybe feel kind of adrift. We've put out some survey data showing that nationally, 36% of American men say that they're struggling to understand their place in their community or in broader society. And we'll have additional data coming out on this topic because it's one that we care about. We want the United States and, of course, Utah to be a place where all people can thrive and live up to their potential. And when we see data that that's not happening for significant subsets of our residents, in this case also referring to men who may struggle, it kind of, to me, it says that, well, we have some work to do. And I want to ask you, from a policy standpoint, from a cultural standpoint, does it feel like we're out of balance in terms of how we invest in pathways after high school? And part of the context for that question is, again, I think there is an attitude out there with many young people. These are anecdotal attitudes, but that they kind of were promised that, well, after you finish high school, you go to college, and if you have to incur student loan debt to do it, you do so. And then, going to college will sort of quote unquote guarantee you a great job and a great income, and you'll be fine. And I think for the folks for whom that didn't pan out, they feel sort of frustrated that, well, wait a minute, this is supposed to be my ticket into the middle class. And I, with a huge caveat, this is not to critique or bash on higher ed, because they still play a tremendous role. And we've had economists on the show say, if you look at the data, it's still a tremendous, completing a bachelor's degree can be a tremendous value. But I say this from the standpoint that there are some specific gaps in our post-high school infrastructure where we have a real opportunity to boost the prospects of these folks. So that's why I give all that context to kind of come back to that question that, are we out of balance? When somebody leaves high school and they're looking at different pathways in front of them, obviously college has been held up, and in some respects, understandably so, given the data, as a great path. But that's not necessarily the best path for everyone, and there's a lot of other options out there. So can you talk about that balance question? Just where do you see us as a nation in terms of what we're investing in after high school?
Right. I mean, it gets to how we think about everyone in America. But 30% of everyone in America may complete a bachelor's degree, but that's not everyone. So, yes, we massively underinvest in other methods of being successful in the United States. And, frankly, success in the United States shouldn't feel like the Hunger Games. Everyone should have a chance to succeed and not be working for dwindling resources. So, we've built a system where college is the default, but not the outcome. And 95% of federal aid goes to support college pathways, and apprenticeships receive pennies on the dollar. A balanced system would look like this: multiple pathways, equal trades, equal to jobs where you can earn while you learn, to those that you can sit in the classroom and learn. And I go back to my colleague Richard Reeves, who's the president of the American Institute for Boys and Men, and he wrote a piece that looked at what we invest in higher education to apprenticeships. It's 1,000 to 1, so $27 billion on the side of higher education, and just about 300 million on apprenticeships. And so that's created some inequities. So, the Wall Street Journal earlier this week had a report on the challenges that Ford Motor is having. And Ford's having trouble hiring mechanics at $120,000 a year. That's a good wage, right? But here's the stats that sort of lead us there. It's only 114,000 Americans in their 20s completed vocational programs during the first 10 months of last year, compared to 1.24 million who graduated with 4-year degrees and 405,000 who had advanced degrees. So you're kind of seeing this real weight that's going behind higher education with how we spend as a country, both at the federal and the state level, and how we've divested from the trades over the last 4 decades.
Zach, why the difference is pretty staggering. That there's clearly a weight in favor of kind of this culturally traditional 4-year pathway, which again I've said on previous episodes I benefited from. I went to college, I went to graduate school. It's been a tremendous blessing for my life. But to your point, that's 30. If 30% of Americans are doing that, then there's a huge swath of Americans for whom they need other pathways to be really robust and really effective for them. So given that imbalance, why isn't there more investment? Why doesn't Congress invest more? Why don't states invest more? Maybe even why don't private businesses invest more? Why, do you have any insights into why it's so tilted?
Yeah, I mean, I would say first off, there's a cultural imbalance. You think about you and I here, Nick. Both of us have graduate degrees, but here we are talking about apprenticeships. And you look at every state legislature, our Congress today, most of them have gone through a higher ed program. There's one congressman that I know of. out of New Jersey that did a registered apprenticeship program. And guess what he supports? He's done a lot of legislation on registered apprenticeship because he was an electrician. So, we have really gone about this notion that the only way to success is through a higher degree. But there are so many other ways that through apprenticeships that we see that can be a very successful way to getting and staying in the middle class. My old boss is Tom Perez, who's the Secretary of Labor. He said it was the ticket to the middle class. And I think he's absolutely right. It's like that golden ticket. But, most of us have spent our careers and our friends and our families, us in the kind of the education elite kind of look down on the trades. Haven't because we didn't come from it. And we're seeing a lot more of that sort of that treatment as a second class system. And ultimately it's going to be to our chagrin, because we're going to leave. Most recent reporting is that we're a million electricians short of what we need to fully energize the country. If we want to be the leader in AI, we're going to have to power the country. I mean, we see all of these tremendous opportunities to be the leader in AI, but guess what we don't have? We don't have the people that are ready to take those jobs that are going to energize these data centers. So it is going to take us to have a big mind shift over the next few years to really think about how we compete on a global level and internationally to really being able to drive our workforce into these jobs that are available today. We have a lot of jobs that you can earn and learn today, but we also have to convince businesses that have been in the seat of consuming talent, but not in the seat of creating talent. And that's going to be a cultural shift for us.
Well, Zach, let's take a quick break. When we come back, I want to dive in a little more. I want to ask you to kind of make the case for the model. Like, why are apprenticeships such an effective model that we should be investing in more as a nation, as states, as private sector businesses, and also through that lens of how they can really help shore up the economic prospects of young men. And then as we get later in the episode, how that can spill over into actually maybe all sectors for broad-based strengthening of upward mobility. So we'll get into that right after this break. This is Defending Ideas. Stick around.
Sutherland Institute is an independent, nonprofit public policy think tank based in Salt Lake City, Utah. Our mission is to defend the principles of the American founding and strengthen the institutions of civil society essential for those principles to endure. Sutherland provides research, events, and multimedia to policymakers and the public to promote the principles of faith, family, freedom, opportunity, and responsibility. Visit sutherlandinstitute.org.
Welcome back to Defending Ideas. I'm Nic Dunn. We're going to jump back into the conversation with Zach Boren from Apprenticeships for America. We'll want to remind you, if you like what you're hearing today, subscribe to Defending Ideas. You can access this and previous shows and ways to listen and watch and subscribe at defendingideas.org. Zach, I want to continue because you said something before the break that made me think about this imbalance question of how we're investing in post-high school pathways. And specifically, I want to ask you how it's that, I guess, lack of investment in work-based learning opportunities, how it's affecting young men in particular. And I'm thinking back to a podcast episode we did a while ago, looking specifically at the data showing a decline in rates of enrollment and completion in traditional four-year degrees among men specifically. So kind of if there's this idea that men maybe are not seeing as much value in a traditional college pathway today compared to maybe how they used to view it in the past, relatively speaking. Can an apprenticeship approach be the solution or a solution to say that this is an alternative pathway that's really effective? Can you talk about that imbalance question for how it affects men's economic prospects?
Absolutely. A book on my nightstand right now is Notes on Being a Man by Scott Galloway. He's an NYU Stern professor of business. He also does a terrific podcast called Prof G, and he writes that no group has fallen faster than young men since 1980. The number of men who are neat, not in education, training, or employment, has quadrupled, and we haven't focused at all. We've sort of said, well, we're going to take our finger off the pulse of what's happening with men. Well, I'll tell you what the result is. 60% of men 18 to 24 are now living with their parents, and they're less likely to succeed in college than at any point in the last 30 years. Boys are 5 times more likely to die deaths of despair than women. And we're starting to wake up to this crisis, but it's been just a lot of rhetoric. The Trump administration and its campaign was right to focus on the problems of young men, but they moved into more of, women are the problem, minorities are the problem, illegal immigration is the problem, without really coming up with good solutions for men. But I'll tell you the good news about men, and this is where we can move into like actual action, is that 85% of apprentices today are men, and they're making $80,000 on average. The average apprentice completer compared to their peers earns 300,000 more over their lifetime. And so what I like to say is that's not a flaw, it's a feature of apprenticeships. It's good that men are doing well in the trades and in these apprenticeships, and we want to do more of that. Rather than those there's a lot of young men that I talk to and have done research with over the years that said, "Hey," and it's a lot of the guys like I grew up with that were just like, "I'm so sick of sitting at a desk. I'm not going to spend another 4 years in a classroom. I'm ready to work, learn, get married, buy a house, do all those things, move to action." That's really why, a lot of us, the way our brains work is that we're enticed to action. And so this is a good opportunity for men to get into those programs get into this work that is high paying, and for family formation, to build families that are stable and working. I mean, I would go back to my family. My parents last year celebrated 50 years of marriage, and the big reason was that we were economically stable. And if we want more of that here in the United States, we need to make sure that the blue collars are as valued as much as the white collars are. And today we just haven't done that. So, um, but for apprenticeships, if we're going to expand them, it shouldn't be a zero sum kind of thing. If we expand apprenticeships, they're going to be good for men and women. More economic opportunity is not it's not taking from Peter to pay Paul. And when we help find people that purpose, that path to prosperity, I think we all win. And the momentum behind this is actually real. So, during my time in starting with apprenticeships in 2013, I worked at the Office of Apprenticeship. It was a $27 million program. And today that office is managing assets that are over $1 billion through the last 5 to 10 years. So we're seeing that apprenticeships have actually increased, nearly doubling over the last decade. And I think that is a really good story for America, but it's particularly a good story for men that want to get into the middle class and want to succeed, succeed moving forward.
Zach, hearing the expansion of apprenticeships is really encouraging, but there's still a fairly small segment of the workforce, right? I wonder if you can talk about how do you make sense of kind of where apprenticeships stand today? And there has been this positive growth, but it's still again a small segment of the economy of the workforce. Can you talk about what that looks like and maybe why that is, and what we should be doing to try and expand that, or I guess why we should expand it?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to our federal spending. I mean, if we're spending $1,000 on higher education and $1 on the trades and apprenticeships, we're just going to see a small amount of folks going into apprenticeships and earning and learning, and not taking on massive amounts of debt. What has changed is that there are new sectors that are starting in apprenticeships, and that's really exciting. So, 2013, dial back that clock, most of the apprenticeships in the United States are in construction and some in the military. And that makes up 95% of the apprenticeships. Today, we see tech investing. So, companies like IBM, Google, Amazon, Accenture offering apprenticeships. I was fortunate enough to get a call when I was at the Urban Institute from Google that said, "We heard about this apprenticeship thing. We don't know how to do it. Can you help us through that?" And I said, "Sure." We've got a project that we're working on that will expand tech apprenticeships. It was an investment that the U.S. Department of Labor made into Urban Institute as an apprenticeship intermediary. Now, today, there are hundreds of Google apprentices that are all doing these different tracks, everything from UX design to IT help desk to software development to digital marketing. And those are terrific careers. I mean, imagine coming out of spending 2 to 3 years at Google and saying, "I did all of this at one of the top American companies, and I don't just tell you I did it. I can show you that I know how to do it because I was learning that from some of the best mentors at Google." And so I'm excited about that model going from tech, to healthcare. Kaiser offering apprenticeships to teaching. We're seeing a lot of states that are now investing in teacher apprenticeships because we have a real shortage of teachers in the classroom. Maybe because we don't pay them enough, but maybe too that who wants to spend 4 years going to college, spending $100,000 to come out and make $30,000? It just doesn't make economic sense. So an apprenticeship model might actually help us shift the dialogue on how we get more teachers into the classroom and don't require them to go into so much debt. And it can change industries too. I think about the insurance industry. I mean, it sounds boring, but for a lot of young people and for these companies, apprenticeships can be transformative. So a company called Aon and Zurich came together a few years ago and really changed the story on insurance apprenticeships, working with Harold Washington Community College. Before they were a largely white organization that had no pipelines of helping minorities and people of color into those good jobs. And they looked around and said, "Why don't we work with Harold Washington Community College? We'll bring in some of our best mentors, and we'll bring in those kids that maybe won't finish that associate's degree. But if we hire them and we train them the way that we want to train them, give them the points on how we work as a corporation, as an institution, teach them how we do our business, we might just succeed and get some new ideas." And ultimately they did. And this is a really exciting way on how we transform not just apprenticeships into insurance and teaching and tech, but how we transform on how we get people into good work.
Zach, we need to take another break, but when we come back, I want to dive in a little deeper into this concept because you're tapping into something that I think makes the connection between apprenticeships as a very effective tool to help boost the economic prospects of men, as we're talking about with all the data trends we're seeing, but also ways to expand that to have really universal, broad-based economic opportunity that's much more robust for a lot of folks coming out of high school, men and women that maybe is not quite there today. So I want to dive into that a little bit more in our next segment. Again, this is Defending Ideas. We'll be right back after this break.
For a deeper dive into the issues you care about, read Sutherland Institute's official blog, Insights and Takeaways. You'll gain deep insights from policy experts and relevant takeaways voters need to know. Visit sutherlandinstitute.org.
Welcome back to Defending Ideas. I'm Nic Dunn. We're going to jump back into the conversation with Zach Boren with Apprenticeships for America about how we can use things like apprenticeships to create much more upward mobility and economic opportunity for people all across the country. I want to remind you, if you like what you're hearing today, please visit us at defendingideas.org and subscribe wherever you like to get your shows. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you like to watch or listen. Just search for Defending Ideas and make sure you click the subscribe button. And if you're watching on YouTube, if you click the bell icon on your screen, you'll get notified each time a new video drops. And our episodes of Defending Ideas come out every Tuesday morning. Again, all of that and more at defendingideas.org or wherever you get your shows. Zach, to round out the conversation, you said something before the break that I want to expand on a little bit. This idea of deploying the apprenticeship model in other industry sectors. And I have this term in my head that I don't know where it came from, if I read it somewhere, so I'm not claiming credit for it, but this idea of apprentice everything. And what I mean by that is we talked at the beginning of this episode about how kind of that Christian faith motivation of helping people who are stuck in poverty. And here at Sutherland, that's an area we do a lot of work on as well, as poverty and upward mobility and welfare reform policies. And in this conversation, though, we're mostly talking about, post-secondary credentials and work, and we're talking about how this affects the economic prospects of men. All good, all super valid. I'm also thinking about a young single mom with a few kids who's stuck in poverty and trying to get out, trying to earn more and work her way up and out of poverty, because these folks, by and large, they don't want to stay on these government programs. They don't want to stay on the social welfare system, if you will. So I think of folks like that, for whom if we sort of pitch to them, well, we'll help you get a college degree and then you can get out of poverty. Not that should not be something that should be considered, and there could be some great resources for that. But I got to think that someone stuck in poverty thinking, well, if I do this for 4 years and there's a payoff at some point after 4 years, even if it's a good payoff, thinking in those terms versus I'm just trying to get to Thursday and make sure my kids are fed and taken care of. And so I got to believe that apprenticeships offer a tremendous opportunity to go to families that are hungry to escape poverty, hungry to get into the middle class, and say, this is a way that you can start earning right now while working, while learning, and also building your credentials. So I think of it in terms of, I wonder if you could comment on apprenticeships as an upward mobility tool in that context. And can we apprentice everything? Can we have this be as broad-based as a college degree is, where whatever sector you want to go into, you could be an apprentice, and that could really help you out?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think of them as an anti-poverty tool as well. They align wages, training, and employment simultaneously. So you're not waiting on that paycheck 4 years from now. I think a lot about our veterans that are coming back, our servicemen and women coming back from service that are, maybe have a kid or two, and they can't wait those 4 years to get that BA behind their name, that they need to get to work right away. And the GI Bill does some of that to help out in apprenticeships, although it actually has a disparity of about $200,000 that it pays more for higher education versus the trades. So, I think we need to move from this idea of like, I need a job, to I need a career, and apprenticeships playing a big role in doing so. I think a lot about actually some of the apprentices that I've met over the years. I remember Sean at Ameritech Dye and Mold in just outside of Charlotte. So he's 21 years old. he's getting married. He's not buying his first house. He's buying his second house as a mechatronics apprentice. I mean, compare that to a lot of we asked him like, well, how does that compare to like the guys you grew up with? He's like, well, a lot of my friends are on their parents' couch, vaping all day, playing video games, and not getting into the middle class and not forming a family and not getting ahead economically. And I think this is the real win-win-win is employers win on apprenticeships because there's a really terrific ROI for them investing in these young people and adults in apprenticeships. It's a win for our society. Overall, we see positive ROI for states and for municipalities that invest in apprenticeships. And it's also a win for the young person that needs to get started in a job that can't wait 4 years until they can earn that first paycheck.
Zach, I wanna hone in on this idea of. I love how you describe apprenticeships as an anti-poverty tool, and in fact, your sort of articulation of wages, training, and work kind of all aligned at the same time. That's kind of the holy grail of a program that you would want to deploy to folks either trying to get out of poverty or just starting their adult life and wanting to buy homes and build families and those kinds of things. So I love that framing. And I want to let me ask you this. Let me put it this way. Is there any reason we shouldn't think of this in terms of let's create robust apprenticeships for teaching, for healthcare, expand in the technology sector, maybe in the service industry? I mean, like, can we put literally all industry sectors into this idea of let's figure out how to build apprenticeships? Is there any reason we shouldn't be thinking in those terms?
I don't think so. I mean, I've seen in the work that we did at Urban Institute in building national occupational frameworks that there's interest in this earn and learn model. And what we did was we actually built out the curriculum for 80 different occupations. We found that it was available to do in all nine sectors that we looked at, everything from construction to energy to education to sometimes difficult to fill public service roles that can also be done in an earn and learn model. I think the challenge is we just don't have the policy framework set up, and culturally we have not uh, lifted up this idea that we can really do apprenticeship versus every job requires a bachelor's degree. So we see that there are some policy levers that we could be pulling in terms of we look at a pay for apprentice model where you're leveraging not just what the government puts in. Government puts in a little to get the apprenticeship started, get employers interested in the apprenticeship. Intermediaries support the employers to start those apprenticeships. But in large part, you're leveraging a public private partnership where that company is going to be paying for the lion's share of that apprenticeship. And what a better way to scale economic opportunity than saying the government's not going to do it all. We're gonna depend on the private sector to really invest in the benefit of their people and in their and among their economic future as well.
Zach, in the couple of minutes that we have left, I want to hone in on some kind of public policy maker questions. If we kind of treat this as what kind of advice would you give to policymakers or leaders at the federal level and at the state level if they're hearing this and if folks are hearing this saying, yeah, this sounds great. How do we do it? How do we do it as a state? How do we do it as a nation? And specifically, I want to ask you because you mentioned this to me before we started to record. There was a recent announcement about kind of shifting around post-secondary and K-12 ed programs at the federal level. Can you talk a little bit about what happened and what it means for this conversation about apprenticeships?
Yeah, so the Trump administration has really been set on um, shrinking the size of government, especially the Department of Education. Wherever you stand on that is fine, but I think it has a direct implication for how we think about earn and learn programs. Is that if we look back in terms of all the federal reorganizations. Take DHS. When I was a young guy with less gray hair, we brought 22 agencies together. It took decades for them to reorganize, for those agencies to work together to make sure that all the levers and gears were working out right. And now we're making that same mistake over again. We're just shifting all the priorities of the Department of Education and kind of slotting them in a square peg in a round hole by putting them over at the Department of Labor. And when I think what we ought to be doing is saying, hey, we know we have evidence that apprenticeships really work. They work for companies and they work for workers. And we ought to be investing more in that in terms of modernizing the system, making it easier to start apprenticeships, putting more intermediaries on the street to help companies understand how to get those apprenticeships started, and supporting them with a little bit of federal dollars as we see our competitors like the UK and Switzerland and Germany really having robust systems that really work because they invest a couple of billion in apprenticeships versus our $300 million. So it's really about kind of shifting resources towards something that is evidence based and we know is going to be helping folks get into good work and helping businesses at the same time.
Zach, final couple questions I would really hone in on. If you were sitting down talking with members of Congress, members of the current administration in Washington, we'll start there and then we'll go to the state level. But if you were to tell them, here's the one thing you should be doing when it comes to apprenticeships, either if they're saying, well, how much we invest in 4-year degrees versus apprenticeships, is that a good place to focus? So either that or just what would you say is this is the most important thing that we should do at the federal level tomorrow that is going to help fix this imbalance and strengthen apprenticeships as a tool of opportunity? What's the one big thing you'd say to folks on the federal level?
Well, I think we can start one by by making it easier for veterans to actually enter apprenticeships. From some analysis that I've done, is that a lot of companies really like hiring veterans. They're ready to do it. Some of them are actually hiring veterans in apprenticeships, but they need more incentives to do it. Today, the GI Bill actually creates a large disparity in offering $200,000 more if you decide to go into higher education, into going and getting that French lit degree at Brown versus going into a plumbing apprenticeship. Now, I think that is creating a second class system for those that choose the trades, and we can reform that right away. The second thing that I would do is to take a look at our 1937 National Apprenticeship Act, and that it requires a lot of reforms if we're going to be competitive in every industry from AI to healthcare. And that requires a real reform to invest in states. It requires a real investment into intermediaries. And it also requires us to think differently about how we help get people from secondary education out of high school. And for those folks that want to go right into their career, that we create a smooth pathway. But that reform is long overdue. It's 85 years old. The language that we have there is about as whiz bang as indoor plumbing was at the time. And we just need a larger, more robust system if we're ever going to compete on a greater level.
Zach, final question for you. Let's bring it down to the state level. You're talking to a governor, to legislative leadership. State legislatures are gearing up for the legislative sessions in 2026. And if they're thinking about this and they think, hey, we heard the conversation, we're very intrigued. What should we do? Tell us the bill to run. Tell us what to do as a state to try and take a real step forward here. What's the one thing they should focus on first in 2026?
Yeah, I think first we're seeing a lot of states that are doing really well with a pay for performance model or pay for apprenticeship. So California, Iowa, Maryland are all leading in these new initiatives to actually invest in the startup of an apprenticeship program, investing 3 to 4 thousand in an intermediary and 3 to 4 thousand in that employer that hires an apprentice, and that can really kick open the door to having great conversations about the value of apprenticeships with employers that have a need for talent today. So I would say support that effort around pay for apprentice and support those intermediaries that are engaged at the local level in your state, that know your employers, that know what they need, that have those connections to secondary education. Secondly, embedding youth apprenticeship and career and technical education into apprenticeships, really creating that pathway from high school to employment. And not just employment, but actually into real careers. These are ways that we've seen Iowa really succeed in the way that they design apprenticeship programs at the high school level for local employers. It's really important to think about how we invest in our rural communities. And this apprenticeship and youth apprenticeship is a great way to really think about how we offer real opportunities in our rural communities, like the place where I live, that could use a little bit more support to ensure that our young people don't just grow up and go off to the city. They have opportunities to grow families at home. And then the third thing would be is to focus on where you're short workers, whether that's in tech, healthcare, education, or the trades. Let's invest in those occupations that we need to fill today and ensure that those are incentivized at the state and local level.
Well, Zach, we will leave it there. This is obviously a huge issue that we're going to keep talking about, and would love to keep the collaboration going with you all at Apprenticeships for America. But just want to say thank you on behalf of our audience. These are important conversations that these kinds of ideas, I think, are not talked about enough as tools that are out there. There's a ton we could do at the state and federal level to increase the options that people have after they leave high school to learn, to work, to earn good wages, and get themselves on a path into the middle class and ultimately to attaining their version of the American dream. And so I'm really grateful that you're working on this and bringing more light to it, especially as it comes to trying to boost the vocational prospects for men, given all the data we've seen, and then also viewing this as a broad-based tool of upward mobility for anyone. And so it's really compelling, and I just want to thank you for lending your time and expertise here on Defending Ideas.
Well, it's been an exciting time. Thanks so much, Nic, for asking such thoughtful questions, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Once again, that was Zach Boren with Apprenticeships for America. We're going to take a final break before we leave you with some final talking points. This is Defending Ideas. We'll be right back.
Sometimes it's hard to keep up with the latest policy debate that affects your life. The solution? Subscribe to Sutherland Institute's weekly newsletter, where you'll find in-depth insights from seasoned policy experts, compelling multimedia, and advance notice of special events. Visit sutherlandinstitute.org.
Welcome back to Defending Ideas, and special thanks to Zach Boren with Apprenticeships for America for sharing his insights with us. There's one big theme that stands out to me from this conversation that I think you and I ought to use as we talk with others, as we champion reforms that create more opportunity for those who need it. And I think it comes back to this idea of the need for a cultural shift. In other words, every time you or I talk about how to help young people enter the middle class and pursue their version of the American dream, we should stop talking about college as the only pathway. Instead, always invoke this question: have you thought about an apprenticeship? The question, I think, can be deployed if we're having actual conversations with young people who are considering their options for the future, or if we're talking to policymakers as they grapple with how to invest taxpayer dollars in post-secondary pathways to get the most benefit. Let's shift the culture so that the skilled trades, work-based learning, and apprenticeships are on equal footing with a 4-year degree as a way to enjoy the blessings of American free enterprise and reach the middle class or higher. I think starting here will help influence our policy conversations and hopefully yield additional investments in this pathway as a worthwhile option for young people. We should also acknowledge the significant impact that bolstering apprenticeships can have on strengthening the economic prospects of young men. As our guest said, the vast majority of apprentices are men, so strengthening this somewhat neglected part of our vocational system could be a huge help to men who are looking for better work, for meaning, and for purpose. And lastly, we can approach this issue in a way that isn't zero-sum. There's no reason we shouldn't be thinking about expanding apprenticeships into all sectors. I would say we should focus on where there are workforce shortages and where young families can earn good middle-class wages. But this should make apprenticeships broadly popular as a tool to create more opportunity for everyone. Well, that's it for this episode of Defending Ideas. If you enjoyed this discussion, please visit defendingideas.org, where you can access previous episodes and watch or listen on your favorite platform. Don't forget to subscribe to Defending Ideas on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you like to get your shows. And please share this episode on your own social media profiles or with a friend, family member, or coworker who may find it interesting. And lastly, if you want to support the broad work of Sutherland Institute, if you want more conversations like this, please make a contribution at sutherlandinstitute.org/donate. Thanks again for joining us on Defending Ideas from the Sutherland Institute in Salt Lake City. I'm Nic Dunn. We'll see you next time.